Great, and welcome. Welcome to Block Party. As Sarah said, we are a civic tech project focused on making local policy information easily accessible and bite-sized. We have an exciting workshop planned today, but before we get started, we'll get with some introductions. So my name is Brandon Pachuca. I have a background in architecture and urban planning and software development, currently a graduate student at NYU Center for Urban Science and Progress, and work full-time at KPF Architects as an urban data analyst and web developer.
And I'm Sarah Sachs. I'm a senior data scientist at a fintech company where my work revolves around natural language processing. I have my master's from the Center for Urban Science and Progress from NYU in urban informatics.
So we want to start with a question today. Have you ever attended a community board meeting, maybe by a show of emojis or virtual nods? I see a couple nods here, and many of us want to be engaged in our local community, but it can be difficult, right? And maybe we don't engage as much as we want to. So why are community board meetings important? Well, they're important because they're ways to discuss local policies, initiatives, and priorities for the community, which impact our day-to-day lives. They act as a community's voice when brokering conversation with state and local governments, nonprofit agencies, and other organizations. Community board meetings might be inaccessible because of work, childcare, school, and life that can continuously come up that can stop you from attending these meetings. Sometimes they're offered at times where maybe you just got off work or you're still at work, or they're offered during the day. So it can be difficult to attend these meetings. On average, the community board meetings that we've looked at lasted around 2 hours. And the longest community board meeting that we found lasted 6 hours, 11 minutes, and 58 seconds. And I tip my hat to those community members who stood there and went through their business. And we have found 10 other meetings greater than 5 hours long. So this isn't necessarily an anomaly for meetings to last this long. So by looking at the time investment, it can be difficult to attend all the community board meetings that might occur each week, let alone know what is going on in the neighboring communities around you. And it can be said that democracy is not a spectator sport. To become engaged in democracy, we must become informed. And that is where we imagine Block Party helping. We want to make community level information accessible and bite-sized for easy digestion. There are 59 community districts in New York City with hundreds of meetings occurring each month. And since the start of the pandemic, community board meetings have been publishing their meetings to YouTube, digitizing the information for archive and public access. Even with meetings published to YouTube, the meetings are, as we discussed, quite long, and there are so many of them occurring, it is hard to keep up. Over time, we have seen the number of community boards who publish to YouTube continue to rise. I can see by this graph from looking from 2015 to 2021 and now, the dramatic rise in community boards publishing to YouTube, making that information accessible, presented an opportunity. And Sarah will tell you how it all started.
Sure, I will share my screen. Brandon, if you don't mind just letting more people are trickling in. So if you can just moderate that, please. All right, I'm sharing my screen. So as Brandon mentioned, civic tech has become more virtual. And with this presented an opportunity. So last summer, I started attending lots of virtual events. One of them I saw was Beta NYC's fellowship presentation, where it was a project about scraping the calendar of different events for all the different community boards. At this point, I didn't even know which district I lived in, but I was curious about what actually happens at a community board meeting. So I found where I lived in my district, and I signed up and attended the next meeting. The meeting was super interesting, and I realized there was a lot going on around where I lived that I wasn't even aware of. I started thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we could summarize the meeting information? So you can see this is what was going on in my head on Twitter that I posted in June 2020, where I was thinking about how this could be a potential reality. But in order to actually make the summary, I needed the meeting transcript in the first place. So after doing a little bit of digging, I realized it was actually a lot harder than I thought it would be to find. I realized if I wanted to make a summary out of a transcript, I needed to actually make the transcript myself. And that led us to the evolution of Block Party. This is our current coverage map of the community districts that publish their meetings onto YouTube. It doesn't matter if the meeting was hosted with Zoom, WebEx, or even in person. As long as it's hosted on YouTube, we can access the meeting conversation. Although you can see the coverage is actually disproportionately weighted to Manhattan. Here's a map of the total count of meetings available. The highest count is from Manhattan Community Board 7 with more than 200 meetings. Although this might be because they had a head start with hosting their meetings on YouTube. As Brandon showed in that time series, they actually began hosting back in 2015. And so you can see throughout the city, these are the meetings we currently have. And just this week, we breached over 1,000 transcripts in our database as we continue to process each week of new meetings. Our pipeline is fully automatic and built using Python. And now I'll go into a brief overview of how our process and pipeline works. First, we get the transcript from YouTube, then we format the text, and this allows us to create a summary, and then we share the meeting with you all. So first, we start with the YouTube channel. We have a record of each community district from all 5 boroughs. Using Python, I grab any meeting from YouTube channels that we have in our database, so it automatically searches for any new meeting published. From time to time, I also still try and see if any of the remaining districts are now available. So you can see in this graph, anything that's gray means it's not currently on YouTube yet. So just the proportion of the different boroughs. But just last month, we're starting to see more and more being posted. I found a couple from Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, and actually the 11th in Manhattan to be posted. So this is the only remaining manual part in our process, is just searching for new community district channels to add to our record. The rest is automatically generated. Once we have the YouTube video URL, we use the closed captioning text to compile everything that was said into a full transcript. On the right, you see a little screenshot of what it looks like, the raw text from YouTube's speech-to-text transcription. So you can see it's a couple of phrase chunks lacking any functional grammar such as sentence structure or punctuation. So if you actually watched on YouTube, this is what you would see in the closed captioning text. This is really where the elements of artificial intelligence and natural language processing come in handy. We use these to reconstruct the conversation into an easy to read format. So I'll get a little bit more into that, but essentially we try to restore punctuation by guessing where the sentence break should go. And the meeting itself is not altered in any way, the actual dialogue, outside of formatting to improve readability, such as removing some filler words, such as when someone says or in a meeting. Like that, which we actually count and show on the full transcript itself for transparency purposes. So that's what it would look like on our website, the little flag that counts how many we removed. Another challenge when working with closed caption text is when there are spelling errors. For instance, apparently YouTube doesn't know what COVID-19 is and misspells it wrong almost every single time. Here are some notable examples of how coronavirus was misspelled. To date, we have 75 different ways that we found YouTube transcribes the word. In our pipeline, we would replace any of these instances, like you see below, with the proper spelling of COVID-19. Once we have the full meeting conversation in a readable format with punctuation and grammar, we're ready to create the meeting highlights. We use a concept called extractive summarization, where we attempt to identify the most representative sentences, and we construct them verbatim into a summary. So we don't abstract anything of what was said, we just extract the key content and compile that into the meeting highlights. For instance, we want to avoid a sentence saying, "Can you please unmute yourself?" And instead focus on words such as education or vaccine or housing. From these key terms, we constructed a taxonomy of topics, and it's continually evolving, and any feedback on how we can improve it would be awesome. Recently, we actually just added sanitation based off feedback from a community member. But I created this based off of the different community board committees, which there are plenty, and the different statement of district needs or priorities. We organize the themes under the overarching categories relating to social, environmental, or governance considerations, as you can see here. And this taxonomy is also used to classify and tag each meeting. This is also done automatically using different elements of AI. So if you're particularly interested about a specific topic, such as parks or education, you can filter to that meeting. Lastly, we share the meeting transcript and highlights with the community. Through our web app, which Brandon will demo at the end, you can browse your collection of transcript data. We also set up a weekly newsletter for each community board. This is really where we want to keep things bite-sized. We know people are busy and probably already have a very full inbox, but we send an automatically generated email to a community board that you are subscribed to. So here is an example you might receive if you are subscribed to Community Board 5. It contains the meeting information and highlights, which were automatically sent from the most recent meeting that week. It also connects back to the full transcript, so you can read more context from your community board's meeting. And this allows us to just kind of stay in the know. We know people will probably have a lot going on and might not have the time or appetite to attend all these different meetings, but this at least just gives you a little pulse on what's going on and what's actually being said beyond just, the meeting agenda. And now I'll hand it off to Brandon to lead us through a demo for how you can sign up for one of these emails. I'll stop sharing my screen, or Brandon, what would work
I'll go
best?
ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
And let's see here. Great. So as you can see on this slide, what we can do here is that we want to ask you, what community board are you in? So the way to do that, you can scan this QR code or go to blockparty.studio in your URL on your phone or on your browser, and it will take you to our web app. And I'll demo that web app now. So when you land on the landing page of Block Party, you'll see a map of New York City. Each of these polygons is one of the community districts that we discussed earlier, and they're colored by boroughs just so you can see the borough breakouts. The easiest way to search for which community board you're in is this address bar here. Allows you to type in an address, and it will zoom in and show you which community board district that address lies within. So let's say I wanted to search an address, and this is in Midtown. This is Community District 5 in Manhattan. And what you see here on the left-hand side is that you see an ability to sign up for a newsletter, and that's a newsletter Sarah was showing earlier. So what you can do here is enter your email. We don't ask for any other information outside of email. And once you do that, every week for all the community board meetings that happen within that district, you'll get a meeting highlight email in your inbox each week, showing the meeting highlights from the most recent meeting and then links to the full transcript. You can also look around and see our coverage. And as we showed before, the areas that are brighter than others are the community districts that we have data for. So the ones that are a little less bright, unfortunately, we don't have, that community board currently doesn't publish to YouTube, but we're hoping to see more and more published publicly too. We do realize that YouTube isn't the only platform. We also are interested in, I know some community boards publish to Facebook or other apps, and in the future, we're hoping to integrate with those. But if everyone posted to YouTube, that would certainly make this a little bit easier. So you can see we have pretty good coverage for Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn. And that feature that we're really excited about is the archive. So in the archive, you can actually look through our meeting transcript database. As Sarah said earlier, you can see here in the brackets here, we have over 1,000 meeting transcripts within our database. And you can filter by date range or by community board. So what we're gonna do here, let's go back in time. And let's say back to March of last year. So 1 year ago, let's say March 1st to March 31st, so the month of March, and search. And boy, we didn't know what month that would be, or what a month March of 2020 would be. So you can see here, these cards, you can go through the different meeting transcripts and get information on each one of those community board meetings. So one that we found particularly interesting was this meeting that happened in Queens Community Board 5, and this is in March 11th of 2020. And the highlight that I would like to point to is that this sentence right here. So right now, the New York City is identifying people who may have been exposed to the virus. When we looked across our database, this is one of the earliest mentions we found of what we know now as the novel COVID-19 virus. The features of this archive allow you to save the transcript as a PDF using this download button. You can link directly to this transcript to share. And you can also go into you can link directly to the YouTube video that we pulled. And one piece that we thought was interesting is this piece right here relating to the community board. And it's worth noting that this Queens Community Board 5 was actually an in-person meeting. So you can see here people are in person and they recorded it and then published it to YouTube. So they're a little bit ahead of the game before anything happened. And they were actually talking with the Department of Health. And you can see here in their presentation, they were talking about what was then, what we didn't know, what we know now was the COVID-19 virus that would, spread across the world. So it's interesting that, through the archive, we're able to look back in time and capture these moments within community boards and within our history. So going back to the archive, these are the meeting highlights that Sarah discussed earlier. These, as she said, these are verbatim quotes from the full transcript that will just allow you to get an idea of what was discussed in the full transcript before you go in and read the entire transcript. As Sarah said, we do count the ums and uhs, and we give you a read time just so you have an idea about how long the article is before you start diving into it. And we're hoping to find more and more ways to try to make this information a little bit more digestible and a little easier to access. And with that, I'll actually hand it back to Sarah to go over some case studies.
Awesome, thanks. So yeah, and this is really just a way for you to get a taste of what's going on. You should still attend a meeting or try to engage any way you can, but this is really just to make it more accessible to more people and to make it a bit bite-sized. So with that, we're thinking of how could we use this data in other ways besides as a platform to explore. So I will share my screen again, where we did a bit of a case study. So thank you for that demo. We wanted to now use this as a structured data set. We have over 1,000 community board meetings where we can investigate. So as a data scientist, I wanted to explore this data set and see if we can use it to learn more about when, where, and what was being discussed. So for our case study, I decided to explore topics related to transportation using the term list. We looked at a few key topics, and I just counted how often the word was said at a community board meeting. The topics we investigated were about bikes, cars, parking, traffic, pedestrians, and buses. This was just to give a comparative study. There's an infinite number of words you could possibly look into, but these were just some high-level topics we wanted to explore for this case study. And in order to compile these topics, we compiled a list of synonyms. So the topic bike also includes words such as cyclist or bicycle and whatnot there. So here's a time series where you can see the frequency of each topic comparatively. And we're going to explore what was talked about the most often, which was bikes, and then also what we found to be talked about the least comparatively, which was buses. Is it surprising bikes were talked about the most? I don't know. I was curious to learn more. Such as how did each district actually compare, or maybe which talks about bike lanes the most? I found this spike of mentions about bikes in June 2020 to be particularly interesting because it was driven by one board in particular. Here's a map of the topic frequency over space and time, where the darker the pink, the more often the word was said at a meeting that month. Our data can be used almost as a portal to see what was going on spatially. And if we wait until June 2020, you can see it was Queens Community Board 1 as the outlier that was causing that spike. But our city goes on into our neighbor's backyard. What affects your backyard can also affect someone else's, and we need to consider these things. So I was curious, how does Queens Community Board 1 compare to its neighbor across the bridge? So you see that was a little spike. So we're gonna look to the neighboring community board, which is CB8 in Manhattan. So here is the relative proportion of the average number of times some of the higher topics of car, bike, and parking are mentioned between the two community boards. You can see Queens Community Board 1 is talking about bikes at a higher rate than the other two highest topics of car and parking. And the data, once we investigated a little bit more, it pointed us to a meeting where Queens Community Board 1 unanimously supported a protected bike lane on Crescent Street after about 4 years of advocacy to have this passed. So this bike lane would connect the bridges between Astoria and Manhattan. And as a cyclist from Queens, it's a treacherous journey to get your bike over the bridge and into Manhattan. So here you can scan the QR code to read the full transcript about this meeting that caused that spike, which was for the proposal from the Crescent Street bike path. But here are a few quotes from that meeting in June. The meeting discussed how dangerous the road was and how this connection between the Triborough and Queensboro Bridge was unanimously supported by the members at this community board meeting. So this was back in June 17th, and we can actually now see over time how the topic has progressed. And so in more recent discussion just last month, here are a few quotes from a meeting that also we identified having a high mention of the word bikes. And you can see there's actually been a number of issues emerged around the plan, such as how it actually has been implemented, and also some voices of opposition, particularly how the bike lanes would take up parking and is actually could have negative downsides to a community based off of how people, when they engage what they brought up at the meeting. As a city, we need to think about transit equity from a holistic perspective. Through community board meetings, you can see how often bikes are mentioned, and this could be overlaid with other open data, or perhaps you're starting an initiative in one area and it needs to connect across the bridge. So here's a map of the number of bike mentions compared to the miles of bike lane established in that community district. So the darker the pink, the higher bike is mentioned in the community board, where the numbers represent how many miles of bike lane there are available. But again, it's important to look outside your own commute because our streets are all connected. I attended a Bridges for People event this week and heard a really poignant quote from Courtney Williams, who is the founder of the Brown Bike Girl bicycle advocacy group. And I just wanted to share it with you all because it was a great quote. So we might not be sharing the same backyards, but it is an impetus that you look over the fence or tear down the fence that's been defined for us by generations of negative policy to keep us apart. So this specifically relates to, freedom of mobility and transit equity. So bikes are talked about the most, but what's talked about the least in this case study? And it's the topic of buses, highlighted in green. Again, we wanted to explore spatially and temporally where buses are discussed. And we found a distinctive pattern around a few community board districts. So I was also kind of curious if maybe if DOT was having a different initiative, you would see the same types of heat maps in an area at the same time or what have you not. So I think this could be explored much further, but this was just one example we found when we zoomed into Manhattan. And you can see Community Board 4 and Community Board 12 talks about buses at the highest frequency. For Community Board 4, this made intuitive sense because that's where Port Authority is stationed, which is a major bus terminal. But you can see a similar frequency of count for Community Board 12, a district in northern Manhattan neighboring the Bronx. Community Board 12 also talks about car and parking and traffic at a high rate. As you can see here, this is just the count total compared to the other districts. And so if we zoom into Community Board 12, this is a time series where you can see a pattern of consistent discussion around cars in fall. Through the months of September and November, in tandem with, we see these correlated with a high count around parking and traffic. Almost at the same time, you see those points kind of converge at a peak. This then goes into talking about bus. You see those two peaks in green where the little chat button is connected to. And those were actually two presentations from the DOT surrounding the pilot busway on 181st Street. So we wanted to dive in a little bit more just to talk about this busway where it was the proposed plan in recent survey where they really did a deep dive on the traffic conditions in the area. This is just what I gathered from reading the transcript information. So between the two meetings, we see a progression on the outreach and research for this pilot busway on 181st Street. What I learned is apparently bus speeds could be as slow as 4 miles per hour, where there's a cascading effect of traffic coming in from the George Washington Bridge. So what I read also is cars started to overcome this by taking side roads instead of using the highway to try to get faster speeds, which further exacerbates the traffic conditions. So what I found was interesting is how this then connects to the rest of the community boards, where we found when we overlaid some other open data around where the highways and bridges are, we found those were the community districts where buses were talked about the most often. So here you can see Community Board 4 and 12, which we mentioned before, are these key ports to the rest of the area around Manhattan. So perhaps using this data, we can see not only where buses are talked about the most, but maybe we can identify locations where they can be discussed more. And hopefully with time, we'll eventually see all 59 community districts publishing their community board meetings onto YouTube. To make these deliberations and decisions that go into public policy as accessible as possible, as part of the open meetings law, the community has a right to attend and listen to these meetings. So we do want to help as a source of information to make it easier to stay informed and then hopefully encourage you to engage. So again, this is the same coverage map. So we're hoping to have more of these boxes turn purple within the next few months. And in conclusion, if you can walk away with one thing, it would be this. First, you should try and tune in to what's going on in your community district, because there's a lot going on and it's powerful stuff. Either check out their virtual meetings on YouTube or when they go in person, peruse the transcript or sign up for the weekly email, or your community board probably also has an email that has more information. Second, if your community board is not yet posting onto YouTube or other platforms, you can show support that they should start to. And lastly, we would love to know your thoughts and get more feedback on how we're developing this project or how this data could be useful for an initiative you're leading. We would love to make this data accessible to everyone for different types of analysis, kind of like what I showed, whatever topic you're interested in. Can this be a resource for you to inform what you're looking at? So thank you very much for attending our event. Here is a link to our website. We're also on Twitter, where I tweet about recent topics or highlight different quotes. I try to do similar case studies around a specific topic, but sometimes like on a weekly basis when I see something is going on in the data. And we really look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions. I did notice one before from Seth Grimes. If you want to unmute yourself.
Sure, but you all answered it after I asked it.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, we're happy to, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute and we can try to go through all the questions that we can answer.
Sure, so I see one. Are you considering posting indexes along with transcripts, like transportation as a topic or specific keywords? So as a proxy, we use those 3 topic tags that Brandon showed in the demo. But it would be great to get more of that analysis that I showed at a high level, where maybe you can use the map to explore these different trends going on. I'll call also on Ursula. I see your hand is raised.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is such a great tool. I have a question regarding the presence of the board meetings on YouTube. Does this predate the pandemic, or is it something that they instituted to go virtual like everybody else?
Yeah, we see a couple of community boards on earlier, specifically some in Queens and Manhattan Community Board 7. But really, we showed that plot of the spike that happened in 2020. As more became virtual. So this pipeline works as long as they have a YouTube video available. We tested, it doesn't have to be virtual from Zoom. We just use the closed caption text from anything that's posted. So it predates the pandemic and we hope it postdates it as well.
Yeah, and I think on that Queens Community Board 5 that I showed back in March 11th, they were already, even before what we know now as the work from home and virtual settings, they were doing in-person meetings and recording it and publishing it to YouTube. So they had already identified it as a way to increase access to the information for the community.
Yeah, folks, I love this. This project is just, I was talking to Sarah just last week. I mean, this is a way of modernizing democracy almost. If we can, if folks can get this on a very large scale, there's real potential here to actually meaningfully increase civic engagement. And this is the coolest thing. I did have a couple of questions. I don't know if there was anyone in line before me, but yeah, if so, please tell me. Time. Okay. Well, I mean, something that stuck out to me is, how accurate are these transcripts? I mean, is someone sitting and listening to a sampling of a few of these meetings just to confirm the accuracy, or what's going on there?
Yeah, so we are dependent on YouTube to accurately transcribe from speech to text. So they do have spelling errors, as I mentioned, a little case study on COVID, that it's misspelled almost every time. So that's part of our pipeline. But again, we don't want to alter things. Sometimes they might transcribe something incorrectly, but I would have to go in and actually listen to see what was said. So that's definitely a risk that we try to just inform you that, it might not be 100% accurate. But it would be great. We would love to build maybe some type of feedback. So if you actually attended the meeting, you can say, no, like that is not the right name there. We do find it has the hardest times on like proper names and locations, which could definitely be a risk.
Absolutely.
Did you have one more question?
I mean, I have plenty more. But just, I mean, just for time's sake, I mean, are there other companies or organizations working on similar projects like this? And I guess if so, what are they doing that's different from you folks, either on the user end or on the back end, on the more coding side of things?
Yeah, we've actually seen some interesting, a little like ecosystem building around this. Specifically, one that I think is the most interesting is Documenteers, which is from the City Bureau. And they actually pay people to attend the meetings and make a summary based off of their interpretation. And it's a whole paid ecosystem, which I think is awesome. And that's based out of Chicago, and they have a couple of other nodes. I don't know if there is one in New York, but they have this whole like agenda scraper. So I think they look more on the agenda side rather than what was actually said. So I think that's kind of where they could maybe use something like Block Party to have the whole meeting transcript in addition to the summary. So I'm sure we'll start to see more projects like this emerge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I'll call on Kate Peterson.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello.
Again, I think this is pretty much the coolest project that I've seen all week. So way to go. I know that you guys put a lot of work into this. I just was curious about what it would look like and, if you have future plans to expand beyond community board meetings. So for example, like quickly came to mind, borough president meetings, state of the district or state of the borough addresses, those types of things. Is there a plan for that, and what would it look like?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest advantages to this is that it scales pretty well, and it's a pretty low cost, the whole process. We just need a YouTube video and with the transcript, closed caption text turned on. So yeah, we could definitely expand to other different granularity levels, but I've also chatted with someone from Woodstock who's involved in the community board there and think like, how could this maybe be used for other cities that don't have all the infrastructure for hosting their meetings and having the platform or journalists to attend and say what's going on. Another idea we had is maybe connecting to like the Link New York City kiosks. So you can actually like scan while you're, spatially in the city to see what was going on. But yeah, we would love to try to get other community board meetings involved and other levels of government. Brandon, do you have other thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah. The cool thing, as Sarah pointed out, is that if meeting or whatever the medium that we're trying to capture is posted to YouTube, we can capture it. I mean, one of the limitations is just our server capacity, talking from the technical side. So we would scale that capacity to meet the demand. And so that's been, it's always a fun challenge for me as a technical on the back end, is how do you, make sure we process all this effectively. And the other part is interesting. I actually had the same thought as like looking at some of the local, we've been seeing much more local and state press conferences weekly or almost sometimes daily since the start of the pandemic in March. And I was like, there's so much information, even at the time when those were going on almost every day. I wasn't even able to keep up on like what was like the proper way to, proceed in the world and capture that information. So I think it can scale pretty well if we wanted to create that capacity. I think it's a great idea. And the kiosk idea too is really exciting because I came from a small town where we had, there were certain coffee shops that had a bulletin board so you can keep up on what was going on. But in New York City, it's like, it's so large, it's hard to know what's going on. So it'd be great if, like, I was trying to think, I was like, what are other ways we can think about like a way for the community to find information?
I just have one other like follow-up question. I'm just kind of curious also how this tool could be used to kind of do more comparative analysis about what's being met about and what's being spoken about within the community. So I'm just like in my head thinking, there was this mention of my community board, which is Community Board 1, and they were talking about the bike issue. And, that might be one example of, okay, that came up, numerous times in community board meetings, but then how much is it coming up in like, local chat groups and boards and things? Like, is it a trend that everybody in the community is talking about, or is it just a topic that's being spoken about by community leaders? And that's something that like I would be very interested to see, but I don't know what it would look like to do that.
Yeah, kind of referencing the graphic Brandon showed of like engage and inform. I think at this point in time, we're really just at the inform part, but if we can get that engage facet also, I don't think that's necessarily like something I could speak to, but if we can connect with other stakeholders and make those connections possible, I think, that could be a really cool way to expand and definitely get people's opinion and more engagement because of it. Do you have thoughts? Like, I'd love to hear what you think. This could be.
That was just something that came to mind as I was watching, thinking like, I'm curious sometimes about, when I've been going to community board meetings quite a bit since the pandemic. And, sometimes I don't always think that the topics that are being discussed are reflected within the people that I speak with, like the people who live here. And it's not to say that those aren't important or relevant, but I just would be interested sometimes to wonder, if there's a topic being spoken about within the community, in some sort of form, and I don't know how you would exactly define that. Is it actually being addressed by the people who elected, by the people that they've elected or the people representing them? So, so that was just something that popped into my mind. And I'm sure it's like really far down the line because this is obviously an amazing project. And so, yeah, I love it.
Well, thank you. I think also to maybe touch on that a little bit more, and someone else from the chat mentioned about looking into like sentiment or what's actually being talked about, or tracking different district leaders or politicians on what they're promoting. But that would, just be a little bit more of elaborate than just a naive search for like a bag of words approach in NLP. You'd have to develop more logic and iterate with someone who is an expert on this, like to actually tell us, okay, this is positive sentiment. Because, you ask 50 different people, what's the topic of this meeting? You'll get 50 different responses. So that's also where I think we would want to engage more with specific case studies and initiatives to really make sure the counts are representative of what we're looking for. So Carol, I see you have your question, hand up.
Just to comment on what Kate said, that, well, there's been some talk about how the community boards might not be exactly representative of the communities. And we're talking to a lot of politicians about or candidates, how to, we're asking them, how would you make a community board more representative and diversify, and how would you make sure that it represents the community? So if it represents the community more, then maybe things that represent the community would be talked about more. But my question is, those graphs, like the over time, how many times bike or bus or whatever was talked about, are those graphs available anywhere, or will they become available? Or
yeah, I would love to. I mean, that's just stuff I did in Python. So I would love to make it reproducible and maybe post the notebook for how we counted it. Because again, it's really just a bag of words approach. And also, we can connect. I would love to provide you some of those graphs, but maybe Brandon, we could talk about on the web app, like how you could do that analysis yourself maybe, and then download it and kind of explore, if you're interested in other topics outside of what we looked at. But yeah, we would be happy to share that. I think someone also, do you have one more follow-up question?
Oh, yeah, well, just, I have ideas about how to maybe improve the descriptors. I think talking to people in each committee, like talk to the people on what liquor licenses, and talk to the people in landmarks and get their descriptors, like for each type of meeting. That might, I thought about asking a few people about that. Do you think that would help?
Yeah, I mean, definitely anything we can add, it evolves and it's pretty scalable. We just would add, similar to how we try to extract the key content, we would just add more words to extract. So, recently you actually see like 6 feet I added that way back when, and it's actually not talked about as often now as like vaccine. So, as emerging topics come in, we would probably always have to continue to add. So we're running, thank you all for coming. We're running out of time. Someone asked if this meeting will be posted somewhere. We've been recording, and I believe Beta NYC will be posting it online.
And yeah, one component to jump off that, Carol, is that, we know that we can create the structured data set, right? We can put that onto a web app. We can disseminate that information through a weekly email or through looking through the archive. So we're really excited to see all these different ideas about how this information can be useful. And so we're hoping to take a lot of these ideas and start talking about them and figuring out what can we do on the web app? Because I've always found that, if you tell someone an insight, it's much different than them, discovering it for themselves. That's kind of the magic behind like interactive web visualizations. That if we can give you the tools to go look through this information and tools to analyze it, that means each individual or each community member can go find information for themselves. So that's definitely an area we're looking forward to investigating in the future, because that's the exciting part, right? Is that we can start looking at this information and analyzing it and trying to draw new insights.
And with that, thank you. We'll conclude our event. Thank you all so much for spending your Thursday morning or wherever you are time with us. We really appreciate it. So again, we would love it if you reached out, and we'll continue some of the conversations we had today. And be sure to check out some of the other events at Open Data Week, because there's a lot of great stuff.
And let's make sure that we save the chat.
I did.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that was great feedback. Thank you, Carol, for that. Awesome. Well, I'll stop the recording. Thanks again. We really appreciate it.